Folks, buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into the latest economic circus act, brought to you by none other than the U.S. government and its fearless ringmaster, Donald Trump. This is Boss Economics World, where we expose the economic messes, government blunders, and corporate con jobs that are tanking your wallets and dreams. Today's episode: the so-called game-changing U.S. China trade deal that's about as revolutionary as a participation trophy. Spoiler alert, it's a reset button wrapped in red, white, and blue hype, and it's costing us big time. Let's break it down, from the surface fluff to the deep, dark economic dumpster fire underneath. Oh, look, everyone, Donald Trump is back on social media, screaming, "Great," in all caps about his latest trade breakthrough with China. On June 11, 2025, Trump hailed the new trade framework as a historic win, a deal that would supposedly reshape the global economic landscape. But here's the kicker, folks, this deal is nothing more than a reset to pre-April 2025 terms, before the tariff tantrums and rare earth export curbs turned the U.S. China relationship into a geopolitical soap opera. And guess what? It came at a cost. To seal this so-called breakthrough, the U.S. had to roll back its promised crackdown on visas for Chinese students, because apparently, national security is just a bargaining chip now. Meanwhile, the thornier issues, like the massive U.S. trade deficit with China, intellectual property theft, and Beijing's shady state subsidies, remain untouched. It's like putting a band-aid on a broken leg and calling it surgery. But hey, Trump's team is spinning this like a fidget spinner on steroids, claiming it formalizes the Geneva talks from May 2025. Formalizes what, exactly? A bunch of vague promises and mystery terms that no one outside the White House war room seems to understand. This isn't a deal, folks, it's a PR stunt. And the markets? They're yawning. On June 11, 2025, the S&P 500 barely budged, up a measly 0.2%, because investors have seen this movie before. They've even coined an acronym for Trump's trade strategy, TACO, Trump always chickens out. Ouch. Now, let's peel back the layers of this economic onion and see what's really going on. First off, this deal exposes just how dependent the U.S. economy has become on China, especially for rare earth materials. These are the magical ingredients that power everything from your iPhone to the semiconductors in your car's dashboard. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, as of 2024, China controls 60% of global rare earth production and 85% of processing capacity. And guess what? Trump's eagerness to get these shipments flowing again, practically begging Xi Jinping for a phone call, shows just how weak the U.S. bargaining position has become. But it gets worse. Trump's trade strategy, threaten massive tariffs, then back down after a few token concessions, has turned the U.S. into a global laughingstock. Remember those 145% tariffs on Chinese goods back in April 2025? They were supposed to bring China to its knees. Instead, they triggered retaliatory levies from Beijing, disrupted global supply chains, and jacked up costs for American consumers. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, U.S. tariffs on Chinese imports in 2024 alone cost American households an average of $1,200 annually in higher prices. And now, after all that bluster, we're back to square one, with tariffs at 55%, exactly where they started. This isn't just a trade policy failure, it's a masterclass in government mismanagement. The Trump administration's obsession with quick wins and photo ops has eroded U.S. credibility on the global stage. As Leland Miller, CEO of China Beige Book, put it, we keep ratcheting up the temperature and then ratcheting it back down, but returning to where we started isn't going back to zero. It's actually a net loss, because it eats up credibility along the way. Translation: the U.S. is giving Beijing a playbook on how to outmaneuver us, make a few small concessions, wait for Trump to back down, and walk away with the upper hand. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because this trade debacle is just one symptom of a much deeper disease, government policies that are driving the U.S. economy straight into a recession. That's right, folks, while Trump is busy slapping great labels on his trade resets, the real economy is crumbling under the weight of his administration's incompetence. First, let's talk about the trade deficit. The U.S. trade deficit with China hit a record $450 billion in 2024, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, and it's on track to widen further in 2025. Why? Because Trump's tariffs didn't fix the structural imbalances in the U.S.-China relationship, they just made everything more expensive. American manufacturers, already struggling with supply chain disruptions, are now paying 20–30% more for critical inputs like rare earths and semiconductors, according to a 2025 report by the Peterson Institute for International Economics. And who pays the price? You do, at the checkout counter. But it's not just the trade war that's tanking the economy. The Trump administration's broader economic policies, massive tax cuts for corporations, ballooning federal deficits, and a refusal to invest in domestic innovation, are setting us up for a fall. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the U.S. federal deficit will hit $2.3 trillion in 2025, or 8% of GDP, thanks to Trump's tax cuts and unchecked spending. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is stuck between a rock and a hard place, with inflation hovering at 5.2% in May 2025, per the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and interest rates already at 6%, the highest since 2007. And here's the kicker: while Trump is busy playing tariff roulette with China, he's ignoring the real threat, America's declining competitiveness. A 2025 World Economic Forum report ranked the U.S. 10th globally in innovation, down from 4th in 2016, thanks to underinvestment in education, R&D, and infrastructure. Meanwhile, China is pouring billions into its Made in China 2025 initiative, aiming to dominate industries like AI, electric vehicles, and yes, rare earths. The result? The U.S. is becoming a nation of consumers, not producers, while China tightens its grip on the global supply chain. If you think I'm just fearmongering, let's look at the hard numbers. In Q1 2025, U.S. GDP growth slowed to a measly 1.1%, down from 2.6% in Q4 2024, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Consumer confidence is tanking, with the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index dropping to 58.4 in June 2025, the lowest since the 2008 financial crisis. And here's the scariest part: the yield curve inverted again in May 2025, with the 10-year Treasury yield falling below the 2-year yield, a classic recession signal that's predicted every downturn since 1955, per Federal Reserve data. Oh, and let's not forget the job market. While Trump loves to brag about record employment, the reality is grim. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that job growth slowed to just 75,000 new jobs in May 2025, down from an average of 200,000 per month in 2024. Meanwhile, manufacturing jobs, Trump's supposed bread and butter, have declined by 50,000 since January 2025, thanks to higher input costs and trade uncertainty. And what's the government's response to all this? More tariffs, more tax cuts for billionaires, and more empty promises of opening up China. It's like trying to fix a sinking ship with a paper towel. Here's the bottom line, folks: this U.S. China trade deal isn't a win, it's a surrender. It's a glaring example of how government mismanagement, political posturing, and a lack of long-term vision are driving the U.S. economy into the ground. Trump's obsession with quick wins and headlines has left us weaker, poorer, and more dependent on China than ever before. And the worst part? The American people are paying the price, while the clowns in Washington pat themselves on the back. So, what's the solution? First, we need a government that prioritizes real economic strategy over political theater. That means investing in domestic innovation, reshoring critical supply chains, and addressing the structural imbalances in our trade relationships, not just slapping tariffs on everything and calling it a day. Second, we need to hold our leaders accountable. A Quinnipiac University poll from June 2025 found that 57% of voters disapprove of Trump's handling of trade, and that number should be 100% if people knew the full story. Folks, this is Boss Economics World, and our message is clear: the real threat to your financial future isn't China, inflation, or even rare earths, it's the economic clowns running the show in Washington. So, wake up, America. Demand better, because if we keep letting these jokers call the shots, we're not just headed for a recession, we're headed for a full-blown economic disaster. Until next time, keep your wallets tight and your eyes open. This is Boss Economics World, signing off.